I was standing in a bank with a plastic card so old the edges were cracking, and I remember thinking it was probably worthless, just one more reminder of everything I had lost. Then the manager ran it through his system, stopped, and looked at me like he had seen a ghost. He asked my name again, my grandmother's name, pressed a few more keys, and his face went pale as paper. He cleared his throat and said very quietly that this account had been active since 1945, and that I might want to sit down before he turned the screen toward me. In that moment, my hands started to shake and my heart began to pound, because all I could see in my mind was the day my ex and his lawyer girlfriend took the houses, the cars, the money, even my own children's rooms from under me. And now here I was in my old coat and worn shoes, about to find out whether my grandmother, who used to walk to work in cheap flats and pack her lunch in the same tin box for years, had somehow reached out from the past to save me when I had nothing left but my name and this faded little card. Thank you for watching and for being here with me. Please tell me in the comments where you are watching from, because it helps me feel a little less alone when I sit down to share this. My name is Helen, and I live in Iowa. I am 62 years old, and not so long ago I found myself starting over with one old suitcase and a plastic grocery bag full of crumpled documents. I went from walking through a house with polished floors and family photos on every wall to climbing narrow stairs to a tiny room above a laundromat where the walls smelled like detergent and hot water, and the only sound at night was the machines humming under my feet. While my ex and his lawyer girlfriend were driving the cars I helped pay for and sleeping soundly in the houses I once cleaned and decorated, I would lie on that narrow bed and stare at the ceiling, replaying every choice that led me there, remembering how easily I had trusted, how quickly signed papers can turn a life into something you do not recognize. I felt abandoned by the very people I had poured my whole heart into. And as I sat there with my worn shoes by the door and my little bag of papers on the chair, I truly believed that this was it, that the story of my life would end with me in that small room. Until the night I opened a dusty box with my grandmother's things and found one small reminder that my story was not finished yet. When I lifted that dusty box onto the little table in my room and brushed my hand across the lid, it was like I could feel my grandmother standing right behind me, the same woman who used to press $1 into my palm and say, "Helen, save this. You never know when the ground under your feet might shift." I sat down slowly, because before I could even open that box, my mind drifted back to the life I had before everything cracked. The big house with the shiny floors that I mopped until they reflected the light. The kitchen where I made pancakes on Saturday mornings while my children ran through the hallway in their socks, and my ex laughed loud at the television. I used to think that laughter meant safety, that as long as there was noise and music and birthdays and holidays, nothing truly terrible could happen to us. I met him when I was young and hopeful. And when he told me he would take care of me for the rest of my life, I believed him with my whole heart. We bought our first little place together, then another, then a bigger one with space for a yard and a grill and a pool. And every step of the way I was there, packing boxes, repainting walls, stretching a grocery budget so the mortgage could be paid on time. I stayed up late hemming curtains and mending clothes while he talked about deals and meetings and how smart he was to turn one property into two. Sometimes, late at night, I would think of my grandmother sitting at her small kitchen table, counting coins into little envelopes, never wasting a thing. And I would tell myself that even though I did not live as frugal as she did, I had built something solid. I had a husband, a family, a home with my name on it. Back then, I did not see the way he liked to keep the conversations about money just out of my reach, the way he brushed off my questions with a kiss on the forehead and a quick, "You let me worry about this, you just enjoy what we have." I wanted peace more than I wanted answers, so I accepted it. And when he started talking about bringing in a professional to help us manage all our success, a lawyer he knew, someone sharp who could structure everything the right way, I thought it meant we had made it, that we were finally one of those couples who needed experts and meetings and long words to protect what we had built. I did not understand then that the danger in my life was not some stranger at the door. It was the man I trusted most, and the woman he was quietly opening the door to. And as I sat there over that laundromat years later, with my fingers on my grandmother's old box, I could feel the weight of every time I looked away when something in me whispered, "Ask more questions, Helen. Do not let them move the earth beneath you while you are busy wiping the counters clean." The first time he brought her into my world, he made it sound so harmless. Just a quick dinner after they had been working late, a chance for me to meet the lawyer who was, in his words, helping us protect our future. I remember wiping my hands on a dish towel as they walked into the kitchen. My ex with that wide grin he used when he wanted something. And beside him, this woman in a perfectly pressed suit with hair that did not dare fall out of place, and eyes that looked around my home like she was already measuring it. She shook my hand with fingers that felt cool and dry, and told me how lucky I was to have a husband so forward-thinking. How many men never thought to put things in order for their families. And while she sat at my table eating the food I had cooked, they spoke a language I could not follow. About restructuring and assets and liability. Every now and then he would turn to me and say, "Sign here later. It will just simplify everything for us." And I smiled politely, because that is what I had been trained by life to do. But somewhere under my ribs a small tightness started. The feeling you get when you walk into a room and sense that something has already shifted, even though no one has said it out loud yet. After that night, she became a regular presence in our lives. Not as a guest, exactly. More like a quiet shadow standing just behind his shoulder. I would hear her name in his mouth, the way people talk about weather or traffic, casual but constant. He started bringing home neat stacks of paper clipped together with little colored tabs, setting them on the kitchen table where I used to help the kids with homework, and he would say, "Helen, this is just to move a few things around. It will lower our taxes. It will protect us if anything ever happens." He would tap the page and point to the line where I needed to sign and laugh when I squinted at the language I did not understand, telling me that I did not need to worry about every word. That was what the lawyer was for, and whenever I hesitated even a little, she would lean forward with that professional smile and explain in a soft voice that this was standard, that most families with multiple properties did this, that it was all about efficiency and protection. And because I did not want to be the difficult wife who held everything up, because I had spent a lifetime trusting the people I loved to act in good faith, I picked up the pen and wrote my name over and over, watching the ink sink into the paper while a small part of me whispered that I should slow down, ask more questions, look closer at how neatly my whole life was being rearranged right in front of me. For a while I told myself that nothing had really changed, even as their meetings grew longer and her perfume started to linger on his clothes when he came home late. I kept cooking dinners and folding laundry, and reminding myself that we were a team, that all this talk of restructuring and protecting assets was for us. But then little cracks began to show in places that used to feel solid. Mail started arriving with only his name on the property lines. His tone shifted when I asked innocent questions. He would say things like, "You have never cared about this before. Why are you suddenly so interested?" And every time I tried to explain that I just wanted to understand, he looked at me like I was accusing him of a crime. One afternoon, he came home with that same folder. But this time when he set it on the table, there was an edge in his voice I had not heard before. He told me calmly that the papers we were signing would simplify things if anything ever happened between us. That people our age needed to be realistic. And when I felt my stomach twist and asked if he was planning to leave, he did not answer directly. He only said that if I trusted him, I would sign. A few weeks later, after one too many nights when he did not come to bed, and one too many mornings when he smelled like someone else's soap, I found out what all that realism really meant. He was waiting for me in the living room with the lawyer girlfriend seated beside him, not as our advisor, but as his partner. And in her hand was a crisp envelope with my name on it. Inside were divorce papers already drafted, with neat paragraphs that turned the houses into his separate property. The cars into company assets outside the marriage, the savings into accounts I had no access to. When I said this could not be right, that we had built everything together, she slid her glasses higher on her nose and told me very calmly that I had already signed off on most of it, that the documents we had gone through in the past months laid this foundation. And in that moment, standing there in my own living room with my heart hammering so loud I could barely hear my own voice, I realized that every signature I had given in good faith had been one more brick in the wall they were building to push me out of my own life. The weeks that followed felt like being dragged through a storm I could not step out of. One meeting after another, one cold room after another, until I found myself standing in a courtroom that did not feel like a place for truth, only a place where whoever had the sharpest lawyer and the thickest stack of papers could rewrite reality. I sat there at a wooden table while his attorney, the same woman who once ate at my kitchen and smiled at my cooking, spoke about assets and prior agreements and how everything had already been decided. She never raised her voice. She did not need to. The documents I had signed did all the shouting for her. When my turn came to speak, my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from dropping my notes. I tried to explain how many years I had spent keeping our home together, how every mortgage payment came with sacrifices I had made quietly, how I had trusted my husband when he said we were only organizing things, but the judge kept coming back to the same line, the one that said I had knowingly agreed. On paper I looked like a woman who had been fairly informed and simply accepted. When they talked about the houses, they called them his investments. When they talked about the cars, they called them business vehicles. When they talked about our savings, they listed accounts I no longer had any legal right to see. And the worst cut came when the question of where the children would live was folded into the idea of stability, bigger house, better school district, familiar rooms. They framed it like it was kindness to let them stay with him, like I was somehow selfish for wanting them to sleep under my roof. By the time the gavel came down and the decision was read, I understood that I was leaving that room with my last name and little else, no keys in my purse, no deed in my drawer, and the people I had loved most, walking back to a life where my place had been quietly erased. When the decision was final and the papers were signed, they handed me a manila envelope with copies of documents I could barely look at. And I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the fight in that room was over. Heavier because the life I had walked in with did not exist anymore. I remember sitting on a bench outside with the traffic going by and realizing I had nowhere to go that was truly mine. No set of keys in my pocket that fit a lock with my name on it. In the days that followed, I found a small place I could afford, a narrow stairwell leading up to a room with peeling paint and a single window. I carried what was left of my life in one worn suitcase, and a plastic bag full of bills and copies and letters that all seemed to say the same thing. You are on your own now. At night, when the street quieted down and there was nothing left to distract me, I would sit on the edge of that bed and feel every silence press in around me. Sometimes I would scroll through old pictures on my phone until my eyes hurt. Then one evening I opened the closet where I had pushed everything I did not want to think about, and there, shoved behind a stack of folders, was a small cardboard box with my grandmother's handwriting on the lid. Seeing her name written in that familiar careful script pulled something in my chest. I carried the box to the little table under the window, sat down slowly and lifted the top. Inside were pieces of her life that had survived long after she was gone. A handkerchief with her initials, a recipe card smudged with flour, a few black and white photographs curling at the corners and tucked at the bottom, wrapped in a scrap of waxy paper. Was that old bank card with my own name printed on it. I turned it over in my fingers, feeling the ridges of the numbers, and for a moment I almost laughed at myself for thinking it could mean anything. Then my eyes caught a short line she had written on the paper years ago in that stubborn, steady handwriting. A simple reminder that I was more than what anyone could take from me. And as I sat there under that weak light with tears starting to blur the edges of everything, I realized that this little piece of plastic might be the only door I had left to knock on. The next morning, I put that old card in my wallet like it was something fragile and stepped out into the chill, telling myself that if it was nothing, at least I would know. I took the bus downtown and got off in front of the branch my grandmother used to talk about, the one with the heavy doors and the old logo still etched in the glass. Inside it smelled like paper and polish and a little like dust. I waited in line with my heart thudding in my throat until it was my turn. And when I handed the young teller that faded piece of plastic, she turned it over like she had never seen one that old. She smiled politely and tried to run it. Then her face changed just a little and she said she needed to call her manager. He came out, older, with silver at his temples, and the tired eyes of someone who has been doing the same job for a very long time. He asked my name, my grandmother's full name, tapped something into the computer, then leaned in closer to the screen, his expression slipping from routine to something like surprise. His voice was quieter when he told me this account had been open since 1945, that it had rolled through bonds and certificates and investments for decades. And when he turned the monitor so I could see, and those numbers came into focus, larger than anything I had ever seen attached to my name. My legs felt weak. I had to grip the edge of the counter to steady myself. Because in that single moment, I went from a woman who thought she had been stripped of everything to a woman staring at proof that my grandmother had been quietly building a lifeline for me long before my ex and his lawyer even knew my name. For a moment I just stood there staring at those numbers, and it felt like the air in that bank had changed. Like the floor under me was finally solid again, after months of feeling like I was walking on thin ice. The manager kept talking gently, explaining how my grandmother had started with war bonds, how over the years those had been rolled into savings certificates, then into funds that kept growing quietly while the world outside moved on. He said she had set it up in a way that kept my name on it through every change, that no one else had ever touched it. Not my parents, not my ex, no one. I listened with tears burning in my eyes, because I could see her in my mind, that small woman in her worn coat, packing the same lunch every day, coming home tired but still making time to sit with me at her little table. Teaching me how to stretch a dollar, I realized she had been taking tiny pieces of her own comfort and tucking them away for a future she would never see, trusting that one day I might need it. When I finally stepped back out into the daylight, the street looked the same, cars passing, people hurrying by with coffee and phones and bags, but inside I was different. I was not rich in the way people brag about, but I was no longer desperate. I was no longer cornered. I went back to my small room over the laundromat that afternoon and sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the machines humming below. And I let myself cry in a way I had not allowed since the divorce. Not the sharp, hopeless tears of losing everything, but a deep, shaking relief that someone had loved me enough to plan for a day when I would be standing alone. I promised her right then, out loud, that I would not waste what she had done. I would not blow it on anger or quick revenge. The first thing I did with that gift was simple. I found a modest house in a quiet street. Nothing like the big showy place my ex kept. Just a little home with a porch and a kitchen where the light fell soft in the mornings. I paid for it clean, in my own name. And when I turned the key in that door for the first time, knowing no one could take it from me with a trick or a signature, I felt my shoulders drop and my breath come easier. It was the first step in building a life that belonged to me again. But it was not the last step. Because once I had a roof of my own and a door that locked from the inside, I was finally ready to look back at what they had done and decide how I was going to answer it. Once I had that little house and a bed that did not shake with the rumble of washing machines, once I knew my lights would stay on and my fridge would be full, my mind finally had room to do something other than just survive. I sat at my kitchen table one afternoon with a cup of coffee and spread out every document I had from the divorce, the copies they thought would scare me into never asking questions again, and I looked at them with new eyes, not as a woman begging for mercy, but as a woman who had been given the means to stand up. I knew I needed someone who was not afraid of my ex or impressed by the woman on his arm. So I asked around quietly until I found an attorney who did not share country clubs or dinner parties with either of them. A woman closer to my age who looked me in the eye and did not talk down to me. We sat together in her office under a lamp that buzzed softly, and I told her everything: how the lawyer girlfriend had eaten at my table, how the papers had appeared one by one, how I had been told over and over that it was all standard, all for our protection. She listened without interrupting, only stopping now and then to circle something on a page or write a note in the margin. When she finally leaned back, she let out a slow breath and said that what they did was not just cruel. Parts of it were wrong in a way the law actually recognized. She showed me where there should have been disclosures about conflict of interest, where I should have been advised to get my own representation, where the language they used leaned on my trust instead of my understanding. Hearing someone say out loud that I had been taken advantage of, not because I was stupid, but because I was trusting, made something inside me straighten. We decided to move carefully, filing motions to reopen certain parts of the agreement, asking the court to look again at the way assets had been shifted and titled, sending a formal complaint to the board that oversaw my ex's girlfriend's license. The process was slow and tiring. There were days when thick envelopes arrived in my mailbox and my hands trembled before I opened them. Nights when I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was poking a sleeping bear. But every time doubt crept in, I would picture my grandmother's neat handwriting on that slip of paper and remind myself that this money was not a lottery prize. It was a shield she had built for me, and if I did not use it to defend my own name, then all those years she spent packing cheap lunches and walking through snow to work would have been wasted. So I kept going, one appointment at a time, one signed affidavit at a time, slowly turning all the quiet hurt they had poured into my life into something steady and strong that could finally push back. The day we finally went back to court for the new hearings, I woke up before the alarm with my heart already pounding. I sat on the edge of my bed in that little house my grandmother had paid for without ever knowing it, and I told myself out loud that no matter what happened in that room, I was not the same woman who had walked in there the first time. I dressed carefully, nothing flashy, just a simple dark dress and the necklace my grandmother used to wear on Sundays, and when I walked into the courthouse, the hallway felt different under my feet, not kinder, but less powerful somehow. Like I was finally seeing the walls and not just the fear. When I stepped into the courtroom and saw my ex seated at his table with the lawyer girlfriend beside him, I noticed that she would not quite meet my eyes. She was scrolling through her papers a little too quickly, and his jaw was clenched in that way it got when he knew control was slipping. My attorney sat down next to me and gave my hand one quick, firm squeeze. Then the judge came in, and the room shifted from buzzing to still. This time it was not my voice on trial. It was the way they had done things. My lawyer began to lay out the story piece by piece, not in the language of heartbreak or betrayal, but in the language they respected in that building. Dates and signatures, emails and timelines. She showed how the lawyer girlfriend had advised both sides without ever putting it in clear writing. How documents were drafted with language that favored only him, while I was told it was standard. How property moved just before discussions of separation began. Every time she pointed to a page and read a line that proved what they had done, I felt something inside me loosen. The judge asked questions I had wished someone would ask the first time, like whether I had been told plainly that the lawyer at my kitchen table represented my husband and not me, whether I had been encouraged to seek my own counsel before signing. There was a moment when the girlfriend had to answer directly, her voice still smooth, but just a touch too tight as she admitted things she could not deny, like the fact that she never gave me a written statement of my rights. My ex tried to play it off, saying we had all agreed because it was easier that way. But this time the excuses did not sound so polished. They sounded like what they were: a man scrambling to hide behind paperwork now that someone was reading it closely. In the end, the judge did not wave a magic wand and hand me back every key they had taken. Life does not work like that. But the decision changed. Some of the property transfers were undone or adjusted. I was awarded a share I had been cheated out of before. The support terms were revised to reflect the years I spent working in our home and not in his office. And the court opened the door for me to see my children more often. Not as a visitor who should be grateful for scraps of time, but as a parent whose presence mattered. There was also a formal note made about the conduct of his girlfriend as an attorney. A referral to the people who would decide whether her license deserved a closer look. When we walked out of that room, my ex's face was red and tight. He muttered something about me being ungrateful, about how I should have left things alone, but I did not answer. I did not need to. For the first time in a long while, I felt like the ground under my feet belonged to me again. Not because someone gave it as a favor, but because I had stood up, held my own name in my hands, and refused to let their version of the story be the final one written on the record. These days when I wake up in my little house, with sunlight sliding across the kitchen table and the kettle beginning to murmur on the stove, I sometimes have to remind myself that this life is real. That I am not still in that room over the laundromat listening to machines shake the floor. I move through these quiet rooms, knowing every wall and every lamp was chosen by me and paid for with money my grandmother saved one careful dollar at a time. And I think about how strange it is that the person who protected me most, in the end, was someone who has been gone for years. My ex still lives in his big house, he still has his stories, and the lawyer who once smiled at me across my own table now has to answer questions she never thought anyone would ask. But they are not the center of my days anymore. What matters to me now is that when my doorbell rings and I open it to see one of my children standing there with uncertainty in their eyes, I can welcome them into a space that is calm and mine. We sit at this little table and drink tea. And slowly the questions start coming. Why did things happen the way they did? What really went on back then? I do not use those moments to poison them against their father. I simply tell the truth in a steady voice. That love can be real and still be used like a mask. That trust is a beautiful thing, but it should never be blind. And that no matter how much anyone tries to strip you down to nothing, they cannot touch the part of you that knows your own worth. I have learned that starting over at 62 is not a tragedy. It is just a different kind of beginning, one where I finally put my own name at the top of the list. If you are listening to me right now and you have felt that same cold fear of losing everything, I want you to know that you are not as powerless as they want you to believe. You have the right to ask questions, to protect yourself, to walk away from people who only value what you can give them. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of my story. It means more than you know. Please tell me in the comments where you are watching from, and if any part of this touched something in your own life. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, from a woman who has been knocked down and learned how to stand up again. I would be grateful if you subscribe, so we can keep walking through these truths together.